Hi, welcome back to Com 225. And today we're going to be talking about persuasion. And when I think about persuasion, I think that this happens all the time in our lives. I think about, just driving down the road. I think about looking at my endless hours on TikTok, social media, Instagram. I think about walking around school and seeing random flyers, like persuasive messages just surround us constantly all the time. And so getting into this chapter is kind of focusing a lot about how first, like, what is persuasion? How are we bombarded by it? And so here's our definition of persuasion, which I actually really like this definition. I've taught public speaking for many, many years, and I thought to myself, is this my favorite definition? And I think so. So it's the art of convincing others in a favorable way to get their attention on my viewpoint. Now, I think the key term here is favorable. So I could persuade you about why I think you should do schoolwork every morning, and I'm going to be telling you why I think working in the morning is the best time to work. And so I'm trying to kind of portray it in a favorable way so that you believe me and that you feel persuaded and you're like, hey, I like that message. Now, if you're a night owl and you don't like to do work in the morning, but you do great work at night, you're going to hear my message and you're going to be like, "Oh, I don't really like that. I kind of unfavor it." And so you're not really persuaded then by my message. Now, with persuasion, it's definitely an art. You have to know how to hit your audience. You have to think about what do they want and how can I make them get what I want as well. And so that's why it's definitely an art. It is a skill. It does take practice. Some people I do feel are born with good persuasive tactics. Now, some people aren't, so they have to really think about it. You have to plan your argument. You have to execute it, in a thoughtful manner. Like I'm saying, audience analysis. What do you want, and how can I make you want my message? At least to favor my message. Now, there are some key things here that are very different from informative speeches, informative speaking. And so, some differences here is like persuasion. I'm trying to get you to change, I'm trying to get you to believe my message. Now, informative speaking, which we've heard just a few weeks ago, 1 week, with informative speeches, you want to think, I'm just giving you the details. I'm giving you some facts. I'm teaching you something. Now, am I telling you to do something? Then that leaks into being persuasive. So there are some key differences here. I know some of us shared some informative speeches and I wrote notes saying, this would be a great persuasive speech as well. You're also giving me information, but you're giving me information in a certain light for me to believe a certain thing, you know? So those are kind of the big differences. What are you trying to do, slash, are you just sharing information with me? Now, today is going to be all about persuasive. And so these are four big goals about persuasive speaking. Now, it is good to try to hit at least one or two of these. If you're going to hit all four of them, I'm not really sure if we can. But again, it's totally based off of your topic. It's based off of your overall motive in a sense. And so, one of the first goals of persuasive speaking is trying to change people's attitudes. You can have attitudes, and here's a short definition of it. You encompass our thoughts and our emotions, and it's just the way we feel towards something. Have you ever met someone and right off the bat, you just have an attitude towards them? You don't really like them and you just can't explain it. It's in our thoughts and it's in our emotions. You might have an attitude towards, a certain musical group. You just don't like them and you just don't really care about them. And so if I'm going to give you a speech about why I think you should like them, I'm trying to change your attitude. We can get into beliefs now, which is the second goal. And these are ideas we hold to be true. Now we have so many different beliefs in our lives. And a lot of these are really ingrained from our culture and from the way that we're raised and our family and all of that. And so this one can get a little tougher because now we're kind of getting to your core. What do you hold to be true? And why am I going to persuade you as to why I think my way is better or why my belief is more true in a sense? We also have values, which I feel are very similar to beliefs, but with values, this is our judgment of what we think is important in life. You can think about how different values we can really hold big priority in our lives. And other people may not have that much priority, but you have to think about your goal with speaking to them. How much can I kind of make you believe or make you not believe in your value? Then the last one, which I think is pretty popular, and it's behaviors, the ways in which someone acts, trying to change them, trying to say, like, hey, maybe your way is bad, my way is better. Or something that I haven't mentioned is a persuasive speaking skill of saying, we both share the same behavior. Let me tell you why this is good, and let's continue doing this way. I've heard a few speeches about changing our behavior of what type of milk you should order at a coffee shop. It'd be like oat milk, almond milk, cow's milk, all of that. And it's amazing how it's changed throughout the years. And a lot of that is based off of trends. And so you can think about social media, you can think about what's happening in our world right now, how that can really enact not just behaviors, but also values, beliefs, and our attitudes, just based off how we're influenced by like everything else. Now, why does persuasion matter? Kind of sticking on that discussion about trends, about social media, when people understand persuasion, we're going to be better consumers of information. I think that this is huge. This is something I want you to take away in this class for sure. And just being ethical when you're consuming media. When you're hearing things and people are telling you, this is right, this is wrong, it's like, well, let's talk about this and like, why? Why is it right? Why is it wrong? Are you persuading me in an ethical fashion? Now, sadly, a lot of messages we're going to hear, they're going to be purposefully false. And so you have to think, who's telling me this information? What are you keeping from me? Why are you keeping this correct information from me? We are likely to fall for half truths, maybe those illogical arguments and just lies, because we don't know how to consume persuasive messages ethically. We don't know how to understand the full picture. I think a great example here is politics. And sometimes in the news, when they talk about, like, oh, we surveyed and over 90% of people believe this. And it's like, okay, something that I've started to learn, definitely from teaching this class, it's like, who did you survey? How many people did you survey? What questions were asked? Just trying to be more clear in this data and research that they're presenting to help us persuade in their argument. I know I've never been questioned by the news for anything like that. And so I always ask myself, like, who are they questioning? They're never questioning me. And so with the ethicalness here, we want to be sure, how can I be a better consumer so that I make good persuasive tactics, so that I agree with them or I disagree with them. And I'm just being like proper and appropriate when I'm telling other people and I'm persuading other people. Because I know if I see stuff on the news, I talk to people and I'm like, oh, look at what I heard on the news. And then I'm almost subconsciously persuading them in my message. So we just got to be careful with that. Now, I want to talk to you about three different models slash theories that kind of get into persuasion. What I love about this chapter is that, yeah, it is all about persuasion, but it's not just about persuasive speeches. It's more about persuading, period. And in the communication world, there is under the umbrella of communication, there's a whole section of persuasion. If you're interested in communication, specifically interpersonal or critical communication, so much here about persuasion. And so this first theory that's pretty popular, it's the cognitive dissonance theory. And what this looks at is the motivational state when we're kind of entertaining two or more contradictory attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors also. So we're kind of believing two things at the same time, but they're going against each other. And we got to be aware of if they're going against each other, how are we going to be making ethical decisions? I think to myself about, the whale swimming around at SeaWorld. that they're there. And I think, oh, that's not good, because I've seen some documentaries about how the whales are essentially going insane swimming around in that little bathtub. But I like that SeaWorld is really big into doing research on the whales of all the wildlife in the ocean. And so I promote that. But it's like, but I need to think to myself, how are they going to research the whales and all the wildlife if they're not going to just be keeping them there to observe them? So those two kind of don't really go hand in hand. Yeah, you can argue and say, oh, we'll just go out in the ocean and all that. Yeah, I get that. But, when they're able to have it there in their labs, watching them, but they're doing research for the betterment of them, it's like, which one's right, So this does cause anxiety and this does cause discomfort in me thinking about this argument because, first of all, it's change. It's like, well, what am I trying to change here? Sometimes change just makes us feel uncomfortable as well. I really think a lot about political standpoints and how we're making these big changes. And it makes people kind of have some discomfort. Also, acquiring new information. Sometimes we don't like to look up new information, or when we hear it, it becomes kind of difficult for us to absorb it all, first of all, and then to think, well, what am I believing now? Is everything that I've known before wrong or bad? And so you can see this like snowball of emotion. And then it leaks into that last one, perception shift. So it's like, I believed this, and now I'm slowly starting to believe this, which is fine. We can change our minds. I want you to change your minds. But you can see, again, this snowball just building of like, well, I always thought this, and now it's bad. And so what should I think now? That's cognitive dissonance theory. Then we have elaboration likelihood model. I really like this one. This one looks at how it works in different scenarios, thinking about how sometimes we think a lot about our decisions, and sometimes we just make them so quickly and we look for ways to be persuaded. Your book uses an example of how the author went to go buy a computer one day. And like his computer died and he was really nervous about it. So right away he went to the store and he told the salesperson, like, I need a computer today. And that the person was like, this is a good computer. And so he just bought it right away because he needed one kind of quickly. Whereas, like a couple years later, he wanted to buy a new computer. So he took time, he researched it, he was looking at different models, and then he went to the store and then made his purchase after the research. So let's talk about these two different routes. The first one is when we are thinking, also known as cognitive elaboration. When we're thinking about our decision, we're taking that central route. We have that personal involvement, that personal relevance. So I think a great decision, or excuse me, I think a great example is he had time to make the decision on his computer. You have that central root of like, what do I want in a computer? I have time and the resources to look up what I want in a computer. And so that personal relevance of like, what do I want? Whereas when he was really anxious that his computer died, he needed one right away. This is the second route. And it's when we're not thinking based on situation, based on mood, and maybe based on the inability. I just don't have the time, or I just don't understand all the computer jargon when I'm researching it. This is a peripheral route. And so it's based on anything other than deep thought. I want you to think about how you've ever experienced the central route. Thinking, hey, I have time to think about this. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to do some research versus, well, let me think about, nothing. You don't make any decisions. You don't think about anything else. And so you're just kind of making a decision based off of that moment. And then sometimes I feel like when I do that, I go home and I'm like, why did I make that decision? Why did I do that? This happens. This is the last thing I want to talk to you about, the social judgment theory. And this one looks at we have an idea of what we like and what we're willing to accept. And that's kind of it. When we're socializing with others, we're making a judgment pretty quickly We each have our own favorite position on any given topic. That's your anchor position. So we're gonna stand strong in it. Now, people with extreme views, they can be moved if they have this extreme position, this extreme anchor position, but only in small increments. So I think a great example here is a smoker. You know, let's say you know someone who smokes an entire pack a day. And so they have a pretty strong view of like, this is what I do. This is my vice, I guess. And so you have to think, okay, their extreme view, they're into it, they're not going to quit. So maybe a small increment of like, maybe you should only smoke half a pack a day, right? I should have done some research. I don't know how many cigarettes are in a pack, but let's say only half, right? Or maybe if we tell them, like, maybe you should only buy 5 packs a week, making those small little adjustments. Now, it doesn't matter how good you are at persuading. It doesn't matter about how good your skills are. People with extreme views, they're going to be really hard to change here based off of their own social judgment of things. So I think with this one, you want to aim low, making those small little adjustments into big wins for you as a persuasive speaker. And then thinking, hey, maybe one day I tell them only smoke half a pack. And then a little later, you tell them only smoke a few a day. And then you get into like, don't smoke at all. And that was like your overall main message. But we got to take baby steps in a sense. I want you to think this is the last thing I kind of want to leave you with today is how are you persuaded? I'm a big TikTok fan. Sadly, when COVID happened, that's when I finally downloaded TikTok. And now we're a few years later, and it's like, hey, it's part of my morning routine, sadly. And so I think about TikTok and I think about the TikTok shop. And I think about how on social media, influencers have to put the hashtag ad, right? Because we don't know if it's real or if it's not. Now, if you're not a big social media absorber or consumer, you can think about billboards too. Especially here in Phoenix, we have tons of billboards on the highways. And so think, what are they saying? Sometimes it's just one short word. Sometimes it's like a lot of text, and it's like, what's going on here? What are you persuading me to buy, to do, to believe? And then also political figures. I never really want to get too political in here, but I know that this is a big part of our lives, especially considering how much of the political media you consume. But thinking, how are you persuaded? The people that you follow and the people that you like, thinking that, hey, I'm in favor of their message. They've persuaded me. But it's like, what did that look like? What was it? And was it ethical? And what what does it look like in your life now? Thinking about how it changed your values, your beliefs, your attitudes, your behaviors. So I want you to think for the next couple of days when you've been persuaded. How have you been persuaded? Have you gone out to dinner? And then your waiter or waitress tells you, ooh, this specific meal is good. And then you're like, yeah, okay, I'll try it based off of your mood because you're excited because you're out. There's so many different ways that we're persuaded. And so just take a moment the next few days and think about how that happens to you. And think about if it is ethical and think about, is it because of my mood or did I actually truly think this through? That was kind of like the art of persuasion. I know we're just kind of dipping our toes in it, but I hope you enjoyed this. I know that whenever I teach this, I start to really watch all the commercials on TV and start to think, what am I seeing here and what are they telling me? And so I hope that you continue the conversation in your own mind and maybe in your household. I'll see you on the next one. I hope you have a good one.